"If you translate this document, I'll give you my leftovers," laughed the young millionaire CEO who only cared about money. But the 8-year-old homeless girl silenced him. "Before we begin, tell me something about where you live. What's the weather like today?" Marcus Wellington's Armani shoes clicked against the marble floor of his penthouse office like a metronome counting money. At 28, he commanded a tech empire worth $400 million, built from the ground up after his father abandoned the family 13 years ago. The San Francisco skyline stretched beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, but Marcus saw only numbers, profit margins, stock prices, acquisition targets that would add another zero to his net worth. "Sir, the Peterson contract needs your signature," his assistant Jennifer announced, placing documents on his mahogany desk with trembling hands. She'd learned to approach him carefully, like someone handling a venomous snake. Marcus barely glanced up from his triple-monitor setup, displaying real-time market data. Did they agree to the 15% increase? There, hesitant about the translation services clause. "They're saying it's excessive for what amounts to basic document conversion." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Tell them if they want their product documentation translated into Spanish, they pay premium rates. These immigrants should learn English anyway, instead of expecting us to accommodate their laziness." Jennifer shifted uncomfortably, her conscience warring with her mortgage payments. "Mr. Wellington, perhaps we could offer a more reasonable rate. The school district contract specifically mentioned helping underprivileged children." "No negotiations." Marcus's voice carried the cold efficiency that made him millions and enemies in equal measure. "They want our software? They pay our price. Period. I didn't build this company by giving handouts to people too lazy to adapt." He signed with sharp, angry strokes that seemed to slash through the paper. "I want you to draft a memo to all department heads. Any future contracts involving translation services get marked up by 20% minimum. If these people want to live in America, they can damn well learn to speak American." Jennifer bit her lip. "Sir, some of these contracts involve elementary schools and what? You think I got where I am by caring about every sob story that crosses my desk?" Marcus stood abruptly, his chair spinning behind him. "My father taught me the only lesson that matters. Money is the only relationship that won't betray you. Everything else, family, friendship, charity, it's all weakness disguised as virtue." The December rain pelted against the windows like bullets, each droplet reflecting the neon glow of the financial district. Marcus slipped into his custom coat, worth more than most people's monthly salary, feeling the familiar weight of Italian wool and German buttons. "Reschedule tomorrow's board meeting," he commanded, heading toward the private elevator. "I want revised projections that show we can cut translation services entirely from our standard packages. Why should we subsidize linguistic incompetence?" As the elevator descended 40 floors, Marcus felt the familiar satisfaction of another profitable day. The numbers on his phone screen showed his net worth had increased by $50,000 since morning. Money was the only language that mattered, the only relationship worth maintaining. Everything else was sentiment for people too weak to face reality. The lobby's revolving doors spun Marcus onto Montgomery Street, where his driver waited beside a gleaming black Tesla Model S Plaid. The car's presence commanded respect, or at least recognition of power, but as he approached the vehicle, something caught his attention in his peripheral vision. A small figure huddled against the building's side entrance, barely visible in the shadows cast by the overhang. She was so still, Marcus almost missed her entirely, like a piece of urban camouflage designed to blend into the city's harsh geometry. A little girl, no more than 8 years old, sat on a piece of cardboard that had once advertised a luxury apartment complex. Her thin jacket, clearly from a donation bin, was inadequate against the San Francisco chill that cut through the financial district like a blade. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands around a face that should have been in a warm classroom, not on cold concrete. Marcus paused, his hand hovering over the Tesla's door handle. The child looked up with enormous brown eyes that seemed to see straight through his expensive facade, past the Italian leather and Swiss timepieces, into something he'd thought he'd successfully buried years ago. In her small hands, she held a worn notebook bound with rubber bands and a pencil stub worn down to barely an inch. Despite the cold, despite the obvious hunger that hollowed her cheeks, her grip on these items was fierce and protective. "Spare change, mister?" "Ungi?" she asked in a voice barely above a whisper, yet somehow it cut through the urban noise like a church bell. "Get a job," Marcus replied automatically, the same response he gave to every panhandler who dared approach him. The words came out harsher than usual, perhaps because something in her eyes made him uncomfortable in a way he couldn't name. But something in the little girl's eyes made Marcus hesitate, his hand frozen on the car door handle. She didn't look away or shrink back like the others did when he dismissed them. Instead, she tilted her head with curious intelligence, studying him with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting specimen. "I can't get a job, mister. I'm only 8. Her voice held no resentment, no accusation, just simple, devastating truth delivered with startling clarity. "But I can read and write real good. Better than some grown-ups, I think. Want me to show you?" Marcus glanced at his Rolex, 7:15. His dinner reservation at the exclusive Prestige Club was at 8, and punctuality was everything in business. Time was money, and money was everything. Yet he found himself rooted to the spot, staring down at this child who spoke with the kind of directness that had been stripped from his adult world by lawyers and PR consultants. "What's your name?" The question escaped before he could stop it, surprising them both. "Emma Rodriguez. What's yours?" The directness caught him off guard like a left hook he never saw coming. When was the last time someone asked his name without first calculating his net worth? Without that gleam of opportunism that turned every conversation into a business transaction. Marcus Wellington. Emma's eyes widened with recognition, but not the usual awe or calculation he expected. Not the gold-digger sparkle or the intimidated fear. Instead, something that looked almost like sympathy. "You're the man who owns the big building with all the computers." She pointed toward his tower, its windows glowing like a monument to digital dominance. "My teacher used to talk about you in class. Before." Emma's voice trailed off, her small fingers tightening around the pencil like a lifeline. Marcus felt an unfamiliar tightness in his chest, something he hadn't experienced since his father walked out. "Before what?" "Before the accident. Before I had to leave school." Emma held up her notebook with reverent care. "But I still practice writing every day, just like Miss Santos taught us. Words are important, don't you think? They're like bridges between people's hearts." Marcus felt his throat constrict. When had anyone spoken to him about hearts? In his world, people had portfolios, assets, leverage, but hearts? Hearts were liability, emotional overhead that decreased efficiency. "Where are your parents?" Emma's expression grew solemn, aged beyond her years. "They're with the Angels now. Car accident 2 years ago. A drunk driver ran a red light while Mama and Papa were coming to pick me up from after-school care." She stated it matter-of-factly, like reciting a memorized lesson. "The social workers tried to find me a home, but there aren't enough families for all the kids who need them." The rain began falling harder, and Marcus watched droplets cling to Emma's eyelashes like tiny crystals. His driver honked impatiently, probably worried about traffic to the Marina District, but Marcus didn't move. "What's in the notebook?" Emma's face transformed, lighting up like Christmas morning. "Stories. I write about places I want to visit someday, and I copy down interesting words from newspapers people throw away. Big words that sound like music when you say them out loud. Want to see?" Before Marcus could respond, Emma flipped open her notebook with the careful reverence of someone handling a sacred text. The pages were filled with meticulous handwriting. Stories about magical kingdoms where hungry children found warm homes, where families never broke apart, where money couldn't buy happiness because everyone already had enough love. "This one's my favorite." Emma said, pointing to a paragraph written in purple crayon. It's about a very rich man who forgot how to smile because he spent so much time counting his treasures that he forgot to count his blessings. But then he met a little girl who reminded him that the most valuable things can't be purchased or sold. Marcus stared at the page, his throat suddenly as dry as sand. The handwriting was remarkably neat for a child, each letter formed with deliberate care. Did you write that yourself? Yesterday morning, I saw you walking by. You walk by every day at exactly 7:15, and I wondered what makes someone so successful look so lonely all the time. I'm not lonely, I'm focused, there's a difference. Emma studied his face with unsettling perception, her brown eyes seeming to catalogue every line of stress, every shadow of exhaustion. My mama used to say the loneliest people are the ones who have everything material, but feel empty inside their souls. She said money was like salt, a little bit makes life better. But too much ruins everything it touches. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow, striking something deep and carefully buried. He stepped backward, his polished Italian shoes splashing in a puddle that reflected the neon lights of the financial district like a broken kaleidoscope. You don't know anything about me, he said. But his voice lacked its usual authority, coming out more like a plea than a statement. Emma closed her notebook carefully, protecting it from the rain, with movements that spoke of long practice. I know you walk by here every day at exactly 7:15, wearing different expensive suits, but the same sad expression. I know you never look at people when they ask for help. You look through them like they're invisible. And I know you just asked my name, which means somewhere deep inside, you still remember how to care about someone besides yourself. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from the Prestige Club, confirming his reservation and reminding him about the evening's networking opportunities. 3 potential mergers would be discussed over appetizers. A billionaire from Seattle wanted to discuss cryptocurrency investments over the main course. His accountant would present tax avoidance strategies during dessert. Instead of reading the message, he found himself crouching down to Emma's eye level, his expensive pants touching the wet concrete. You're very intelligent for 8 years old. Intelligence doesn't keep you warm or fed, Emma replied with devastating honesty. But it helps you hope for a better tomorrow. Miss Santos used to say that hope was like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the stronger it gets. What do you hope for? Emma considered this seriously, her young face growing thoughtful in a way that reminded Marcus uncomfortably of his own childhood dreams, back when he'd wanted to be a teacher or a social worker, before his father taught him that helping people was for suckers. A place where I belong, people who want me around not because of what I can give them, but just because they like having me there. Maybe a chance to go back to school and become a teacher like Miss Santos was, so I can help other kids learn that words have power. What happened to Miss Santos? Emma's expression darkened like clouds covering the sun. Budget cuts. The school district fired all the bilingual teachers at Roosevelt Elementary, said there wasn't enough money to help kids like me learn in both languages. Her voice carried no bitterness, only profound sadness. Miss Santos cried when she had to tell our class goodbye. She said she was sorry she couldn't protect us from grown-up decisions. Something cold and uncomfortable settled in Marcus's stomach, like spoiled food. His company had just signed the contract with the San Francisco Unified School District, the one where he'd refused to provide affordable translation services, the one where he'd marked up prices specifically to discourage what he called linguistic welfare. Which school? He asked quietly, though part of him already knew the answer. Roosevelt Elementary on Mission Street. They had to close the whole bilingual program because they couldn't afford to translate textbooks and lessons for Spanish-speaking families. Emma hugged her notebook closer to her chest. Miss Santos said some rich computer man decided it cost too much money to help kids like me succeed. She didn't say it mean, just sad, like when you watch something beautiful break and can't fix it. The rain fell harder, but Marcus barely noticed the water soaking through his coat. He saw his own signature on the contract, his harsh words about immigrants and English. His cold calculation that had eliminated an entire program designed to help vulnerable children. "Emma," he said slowly, his voice hoarse, "what if someone could fix that? What if the translation program came back?" Emma's eyes filled with hope so pure and intense, it made Marcus's chest ache like he was having a heart attack. Could that really happen? Could Miss Santos come back and teach us again? Marcus stood abruptly, his mind racing through numbers and possibilities with the lightning speed that had made him rich. One phone call could restore the program. One signature could bring Miss Santos back. The cost would be negligible, less than he'd spent on his watch, less than he'd drop on wine at dinner tonight. "Maybe," he said, pulling out his phone, "but first you need to get out of this rain." He called his driver with shaking fingers. "Change of plans, Thomas. We're going to Roosevelt Elementary School." Emma scrambled to her feet, clutching her notebook like a treasure. "But it's closed now, Mr. Marcus. It's nighttime." "I know someone who has keys," Marcus said, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "And Emma? Just call me Marcus." Marcus had never noticed how the luxury amenities in his Tesla created a cocoon of privilege. The heated leather seats that adjusted to body temperature, the sound system that cost more than most cars, the climate control that made the outside world feel like a distant planet. Emma sat beside him, her small frame nearly lost in the expansive interior, yet her presence filled the entire space with something he couldn't name. "I've never been in a car this fancy," she whispered, running her fingers along the smooth armrest with reverent wonder. "It's bigger than some of the places I've slept, and it's so quiet, like being inside a cloud." The comment hit Marcus harder than he expected, creating a sharp contrast between his insulated world and her raw reality. "Where do you usually sleep?" "Different places, depending on the night. Sometimes the shelter on Howard Street if there's room, and if the scary man with the knife isn't there. Sometimes the doorway behind Kim's coffee shop. Mrs. Kim leaves me a blanket when it gets really cold, and sometimes leftover pastries." Emma's matter-of-fact tone made the words even more heartbreaking. "The library is good during the day when it's open. Mrs. Patterson, the librarian, pretends not to notice when I stay past closing time doing homework I assign myself." Marcus's throat felt like he'd swallowed broken glass. "How long have you been on the streets?" 2 years, 1 month and 18 days. And Emma's precise answer revealed a child who counted survival in daily increments, marking time like a prisoner. "Since the car accident, Mama and Papa were coming to pick me up from after-school care when it happened. The drunk driver walked away without a scratch. We weren't so lucky." The city lights blurred past the windows as Marcus processed this information, each revelation hitting him like physical blows. 2 years. This brilliant child had been homeless for 2 years while he accumulated millions and complained about the minor inconvenience of helping disadvantaged kids. What about relatives? Grandparents? Extended family? Papa's family is back in Guadalajara. They wanted to take me, but Emma's voice grew smaller, more fragile. Immigration said it was too complicated because I was born here, but they're not citizens yet. Too much paperwork, too many lawyers. Too expensive for people who work in restaurants and clean houses. She wiped her nose with the back of her hand. Mama's parents died in a hurricane when I was 4. The social worker, Miss Chen, she tried really hard to find me a family, but there are so many kids who need homes and not enough people who want to open their hearts. Marcus pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found Sarah Chen, a social worker he'd met at various charity galas. Events he attended purely for business networking and tax write-offs. "I know Miss Chen," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Emma's eyes widened like he'd just revealed superpowers. "You do. She's really wonderful. She brings me sandwiches sometimes and checks on me when she can, but she has like 100 kids to help, and the system doesn't give her enough money or time for all of them. She cries sometimes when she thinks no one's looking." The Tesla pulled up to Roosevelt Elementary, its brick facade illuminated by harsh streetlights that cast long shadows across empty playgrounds. Marcus had driven past this building hundreds of times without truly seeing it. the chipped paint that spoke of budget constraints, the outdated playground equipment held together with hope and duct tape. The faded poster in the window announcing the closure of the bilingual program. "Mr. Marcus," Emma said quietly, pressing her face against the window. "Why did you want to come here? What are you hoping to find?" Marcus studied the building where his cold business decision had shattered dreams and futures, where children like Emma had lost their chance at education because he valued profit margins over human potential. "Because I think I made a terrible mistake, Emma. Maybe the worst mistake of my life." He called the school district's emergency number, using his considerable influence and implied donations to reach Principal Patricia Gonzalez at home. 20 minutes later, she arrived with keys and visible confusion, her expression shifting from annoyance to curiosity when she saw Marcus's expensive car. "Mr. Wellington, I don't understand why you wanted to meet here so late. Is there some kind of emergency with our technology contract?" Marcus gestured to Emma, who had climbed out of the car and stood looking at the school like a pilgrim approaching a holy shrine. "I want to show you someone personally affected by the decision to cut translation services. Someone who lost everything because I was too selfish to see beyond profit margin." Mrs. Gonzalez's expression underwent a complete transformation when she saw Emma, professional distance melting into maternal concern. "Oh, sweetheart, aren't you one of Miss Santos's former students, Emma Rodriguez?" Emma nodded shyly, suddenly looking every bit the 8-year-old she was. "I miss her classes so much. I miss learning new words and writing stories and feeling like I belonged somewhere." As they entered the empty school, their footsteps echoed through hallways lined with student artwork and achievement charts that served as monuments to interrupted dreams. Emma walked with reverence, touching lockers and bulletin boards like sacred artifacts from a lost civilization. "This was my classroom," she said, stopping at a door marked 2B, Miss Santos. Through the window, they could see empty desks arranged in perfect rows, a whiteboard still covered with encouraging messages in both Spanish and English that no one was there to read. Miss Santos used to say that being bilingual made us special, like having 2 keys to unlock different worlds. She said speaking 2 languages meant we could build bridges between different kinds of people, help them understand each other. Emma pressed her face against the glass, her breath fogging the window. She said companies would want to hire people like us someday because we could help everyone communicate better. Marcus felt like he was choking on his own hypocrisy. Mrs. Gonzalez unlocked the classroom door with hands that shook slightly, perhaps sensing the gravity of this unexpected moment. Emma stepped inside like she was entering a cathedral, her movements careful and reverent. She walked directly to her old desk, 3rd row, 2nd seat, and sat down with the careful precision of someone returning to a place of profound significance. "I used to sit right here every morning," she whispered, running her hands over the scarred desktop where someone had carved "Dream Big" in crooked letters. Miss Santos would read us stories in Spanish and English, switching between languages like she was weaving a tapestry of words. Then we'd write our own versions, and she'd help us understand that our thoughts mattered in both languages, that we didn't have to choose between being Mexican and being American. Marcus watched Emma transform before his eyes, from a streetwise survivor back into the eager student she'd once been. Her posture straightened, her eyes brightened with remembered joy, and for a moment, the weight of premature adulthood lifted from her thin shoulders like a physical burden being removed. "Mr. Wellington," Mrs. Gonzalez said quietly, her voice carrying years of educator's frustration, "I still don't understand why you're here. Your company was very clear about the costs being prohibitive. Your representative said that accommodating non-English speakers was enabling dependency rather than encouraging integration." Marcus pulled out his phone and called his legal team, despite the late hour, and despite knowing his lawyers charged $800 for emergency consultations. "David, it's Marcus. I need you to draft an amendment to the Roosevelt Elementary contract immediately. Yes, I know it's almost 8 p.m. This can't wait. Emma looked up from her desk, hope and disbelief warring in her expression like opposing armies fighting for control of her heart. Full translation services. Marcus continued into the phone, his voice growing stronger with each word. Textbooks, digital materials, teacher support, interpreter services. Everything we originally proposed before we decided to prioritize profit over people. Cost is not a factor. Bill it as a charitable contribution if necessary. Mrs. Gonzalez gasped, her hand flying to cover her mouth. Mr. Wellington, are you saying? I'm saying Miss Santos gets her job back tomorrow morning if she wants it. The bilingual program is fully restored, effective immediately. And I want you to hire additional support staff, counselors, tutors, anyone who can help kids like Emma succeed. Emma's notebook fell from her hands, pages fluttering like wounded birds across the classroom floor. She scrambled to collect them, tears streaming down her face, each drop carrying 2 years of suppressed grief and sudden, overwhelming hope. Does this mean I can come back to school? She asked, her voice breaking like a dam bursting. Does this mean I can learn again and have friends and belong somewhere? It means more than that, Marcus said, kneeling to help gather her scattered stories. As he picked up the pages, he saw himself reflected in Emma's careful words. The sad, rich man who'd forgotten how to smile, the lonely king in his glass tower, the person who'd confused success with significance. One story caught his attention, The Invisible Girl Who Made a Difference. It told of a little girl who had no home and no family, but changed the world anyway, simply by believing that kindness was stronger than money, that love was more powerful than fear, that one person's courage could light up the darkness for everyone. Emma, he said, holding up the page with hands that trembled slightly, who taught you to write like this, to see the world with such wisdom? Miss Santos started it, but mostly I learned by watching and listening. When you're invisible like me, you see how people really are when they think no one's watching. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, leaving streaks on her dirt-smudged cheeks. You see their true hearts. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December weather outside. What have you seen in people's hearts? Emma considered this seriously, her young face reflecting the weight of premature experience. I've seen people step over hungry kids to get to expensive restaurants, like poverty was contagious. I've seen men in $1,000 suits argue about money, while families with babies lose their homes on the same street. I've seen people throw away enough food to feed me for a week because it wasn't perfectly fresh. She paused, then continued with remarkable balance. But I've also seen Mrs. Kim leave me food when her own business was struggling. I've seen Miss Chen work until midnight trying to help kids like me, even though the system pays her almost nothing. I've seen teachers spend their own money on supplies because they love their students more than their budgets. Emma looked directly at Marcus with those penetrating brown eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. And tonight, I saw a very rich man realize that making money and making a difference don't have to be different things. I saw someone remember that having power means having responsibility to help people who don't have power. Mrs. Gonzalez was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she pressed her hands to her mouth. Mr. Wellington, this is an absolute miracle. Do you understand what this means for our community? But Marcus was staring at Emma, understanding dawning like sunrise after the longest night of his life. You wrote that story about the sad rich man before you ever spoke to me, didn't you? Emma nodded solemnly. I've been watching you for months, hoping someday you'd see me. Not because I wanted your money, but because I thought maybe if someone as powerful as you remembered what it felt like to be lonely and scared, you might help other people feel less alone too. The classroom fell silent, except for the distant hum of the heating system struggling against the December cold, and the soft patter of rain against windows that reflected their small group like a painting of hope being born. Marcus stared at this 8-year-old girl who had systematically dismantled every wall he'd built around his heart over the past 13 years. Emma hadn't manipulated him or tried to guilt him into charity. She hadn't demanded anything or played victim. Instead, she'd simply existed with such authentic grace that her very presence had forced him to confront the man he'd become versus the person he'd once dreamed of being. "Emma," he said slowly, his voice catching on words that felt foreign on his tongue. "You said there aren't enough families for all the kids who need them." She nodded carefully, suddenly wary, as if sensing that something monumental was shifting in the air around them. "What if?" Marcus's voice broke completely, the words carrying the weight of a decision that would change everything. What if there was one more family available? What if there was someone who had everything material but realized he had nothing that actually mattered? Mrs. Gonzalez and Emma both froze, the magnitude of his suggestion settling over the classroom like dawn breaking after an endless night. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and terror and hope. "Mr. Wellington," Mrs. Gonzalez whispered, her educator's instincts warring with her heart, "are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that I have a 5-bedroom penthouse with nobody to share it with except my own regrets. I'm suggesting that Emma is the wisest, most courageous person I've met in my entire adult life, regardless of age. And I'm suggesting that maybe we both need someone to care about, someone to remind us what really matters in this world." Emma's eyes filled with tears again, but these were different. Not tears of sadness or desperate hope, but of recognition, as if she'd been waiting her entire short life for this moment without knowing it. "Would you really want me?" she asked in a voice so small it was barely audible. "Even though I'm not your real daughter? Even though I'm just a homeless kid with nothing to offer except stories and hope?" Marcus knelt in front of her desk, meeting her at eye level, seeing in her face the child he'd once been before the world taught him to be hard. "Emma, my biological father walked out on me when I was 15. He taught me that love was conditional, that worth was measured in bank accounts, that caring about people was weakness disguised as stupidity." He reached out tentatively and touched her small hand, marveling at how something so fragile could be so strong. "In one evening you've taught me more about real strength and actual value than he did in 15 years. But I don't have anything to give you," Emma protested, her voice breaking with the weight of a lifetime of being unwanted. "I don't have money or fancy clothes or connections or anything that successful people need." "You have stories that can change hearts," Marcus interrupted, his own voice thick with emotion. "You have wisdom that comes from surviving what would break most adults. You have the ability to see people's souls, even when they've forgotten they have them. You have the kind of courage that lets you hope for better tomorrows, even when today seems impossibly dark." He paused, then continued with growing certainty. "And you have something I lost years ago and desperately need back. You remember how to love without calculating the return on investment." Emma slipped from her chair and approached Marcus cautiously, like a wild bird, testing whether it was safe to trust a human hand. "Would I really be able to go to school again, every day, every single day? You'd have your own room, with a desk for writing and shelves for all the books you could ever want to read. You'd have clothes that fit and food whenever you're hungry and people who think you're precious just because you exist. Could I keep writing stories? I'd be disappointed if you stopped. Someone needs to remind me what really matters when I inevitably forget and start counting money instead of blessings." Emma reached out with one small finger and touched Marcus's face, tracing the lines of stress and loneliness etched around his eyes like a map of wasted years. "You're not sad anymore, are you?" "Daddy," Marcus caught her hand and held it gently, feeling tears he hadn't shed since childhood threatening to fall. "No, Emma. For the first time in 13 years, I'm not sad." Mrs. Gonzalez wiped her eyes with a tissue, her educator's heart recognizing the miracle unfolding before her. "Mr. Wellington, the adoption process can be complex, especially given Emma's unique situation and the previous failed placements. But I know Sarah Chen very well. With your resources and Emma's clear attachment to you already, with character witnesses and proper evaluation, "Whatever it takes," Marcus said with the same fierce determination he'd once reserved for hostile takeovers. "However long it takes, whatever it costs, whoever I need to convince. Emma is worth more than everything else I own combined." Emma threw her arms around Marcus's neck with the desperate intensity of a child who'd learned not to hope too hard, but couldn't help herself anyway. Her small body shook with years of suppressed longing finally finding expression. "Does this mean I get to keep you too?" she whispered against his shoulder, her voice muffled but clear. "Does this mean I finally get to have a family again?" Marcus felt 28 years of carefully constructed emotional armor crumble into dust, taking with it the cold businessman who'd walked into this school and leaving behind someone he'd forgotten he could be, someone capable of love. "Yes, Emma," he whispered back, his voice breaking with joy instead of pain for the first time in memory. "We get to keep each other. We get to be a family." Darjin, as they held each other in the empty classroom, surrounded by the ghosts of abandoned dreams now suddenly resurrected, Marcus realized that the most profitable transaction of his entire life had cost him nothing but pride and given him everything that actually mattered: purpose, love, and a reason to be better than he'd ever thought possible. Outside, the December rain had stopped, and the first stars were visible through the classroom windows, shining down on a man who'd just discovered that the greatest fortune wasn't the one he'd built, but the one he'd found in the heart of a little girl who'd been invisible to everyone else. 3 weeks had passed since that transformative December evening at Roosevelt Elementary, and Marcus's penthouse had undergone a revolution that no amount of money could have purchased. Where once sterile minimalism had reigned supreme, Emma's presence had brought chaos and color, art supplies scattered across his imported marble counters, children's books creating precarious towers beside first-edition business journals, and a small desk positioned strategically near the floor-to-ceiling windows, where she could write stories while watching the city wake up each morning. Sarah Chen sat across from Marcus in his home office, her social worker's instincts cataloguing every detail of their interaction. Emma was at her first day back at Roosevelt Elementary. Miss Santos had returned with tears of joy and a renewed sense of purpose that reminded everyone why they'd become educators in the first place. "The preliminary evaluation has been overwhelmingly positive," Sarah said, reviewing her notes with professional thoroughness. "Emma's psychological assessment shows remarkable resilience and genuine attachment. Dr. Martinez noted that she speaks about you with a combination of gratitude and protective affection that's quite rare in emergency placements." Marcus felt his throat tighten. Protective affection. She told the psychologist that she worries about you working too much, that someone needs to make sure you remember to eat lunch and notice beautiful sunsets. Sarah smiled. When asked about her biggest fear, she said it wasn't losing her new home. It was disappointing you somehow and making you regret your decision. The irony hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was a child who'd lost everything, yet her primary concern was his well-being. "I never want her to feel that pressure." "Which is exactly why this placement is working," Sarah continued. "Your transformation has been documented by multiple witnesses. Jennifer, your assistant, mentioned that you've implemented company-wide policy changes, mandatory employee mental health benefits, a new diversity and inclusion program, and you've personally funded full college scholarships for 25 underprivileged students." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. He'd never discussed these changes with anyone, viewing them as private decisions rather than public relations opportunities. "Emma made me realize that success without conscience is just sophisticated selfishness. There is one complication we need to discuss," Sarah said, her tone growing serious. "Emma's uncle, Roberto Rodriguez, has been located." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. "Her uncle?" "Roberto is Emma's father's younger brother. He's been working construction in Texas, sending money back to family in Mexico. He had no idea about the accident or Emma's situation until a cousin saw a news story about your adoption proceedings and contacted him." The room seemed to tilt sideways. Marcus gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles white. What does he want? He wants to meet Emma. He says family should take care of family, that it's his responsibility as her father's brother. Sarah's expression was carefully neutral, but Marcus could read the concern in her eyes. Legally, he has rights. Blood relatives typically take precedence in custody decisions, especially when they can provide stable homes. Marcus felt like he was drowning in panic. In 3 weeks, Emma had become the center of his universe, the reason he woke up excited about each day, instead of dreading another cycle of empty achievement. The thought of losing her felt like contemplating his own death. Has Emma been told? Not yet. I wanted to speak with you first. Sarah leaned forward. Marcus, I need you to understand that Emma's best interests have to come first, regardless of our personal feelings. Of course, Marcus said automatically, though every fiber of his being screamed in rebellion. When does he want to meet her? This weekend. He's driving up from Houston. Sarah gathered her papers. I know this is terrifying, but remember, Emma has a voice in this decision too. She's not a piece of property to be claimed. She's a person with feelings and preferences that courts are required to consider. After Sarah left, Marcus stood at his windows, looking out at the city that had once represented conquest and now felt like a potential prison. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that the family she'd just found might be taken away by biology and legal precedent? His phone rang. Mr. Marcus? Emma's voice carried the excitement of a child experiencing joy for the first time in years. Miss Santos says I'm reading at a 6th grade level, and I made a friend named Sophia who likes to write stories too. That's wonderful, sweetheart, Marcus managed, his voice steady despite the chaos in his chest. Are you okay? You sound sad. Even over the phone, Emma's intuition was uncanny. I'm fine, just thinking about some business things. Remember what I told you about business and hearts, Emma said, with the wisdom that never failed to astound him. Sometimes the most important decisions can't be made with spreadsheets. After they hung up, Marcus stood in the silence of his penthouse, understanding, for the first time in his life, what it meant to have something worth fighting for, and what it felt like to face the possibility of losing it to forces beyond his control. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp December morning that made San Francisco look like a postcard. Marcus had barely slept, his mind cycling through worst-case scenarios and legal strategies. Emma had sensed his tension without understanding its source, spending Friday evening curled against him on the couch, reading stories aloud in both Spanish and English, a skill that reminded him daily of the program he'd almost destroyed through his own selfishness. The doorbell rang at exactly 10 a.m. Marcus opened it to find Sarah Chen, accompanied by a man who shared Emma's dark eyes and determined chin. Roberto Rodriguez was younger than Marcus had expected, perhaps 35, with calloused hands that spoke of honest labor and shoulders bowed by responsibility rather than age. Mr. Wellington, Roberto said in accented English, extending his hand with careful dignity. Thank you for meeting with me. I know this is complicated. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, having heard unfamiliar voices. She froze when she saw Roberto, her notebook clutched against her chest like armor. Emma, Sarah said gently, this is your Uncle Roberto, your papa's younger brother. Emma descended the stairs slowly, studying Roberto with the careful assessment of a child who'd learned that adults could disappear without warning. You look like Papa, she said quietly. Same eyes, same nose. Roberto's composure cracked, tears filling his eyes as he knelt to Emma's level. Mija, I am so sorry. I didn't know about the accident. If I had known, his voice broke. Your papa was my best friend. I should have protected you. Where were you? Emma asked, with devastating directness. Working in Texas, sending money to Abuela in Mexico, no phone, no internet where I was working. When Cousin Maria called last week about seeing you on the news, Roberto wiped his eyes. I drove straight here, 2 days without stopping. Marcus watched this reunion with his heart breaking in real time. He could see the family resemblance, could see Emma's features reflected in Roberto's face like a genetic echo. This man had every right to claim her, and every reason to resent the wealthy stranger who'd stepped into his family's tragedy. "Tell me about Papa when he was little," Emma said, settling on the couch with careful distance between herself and Roberto. Roberto's face transformed with memory and love. "Your papa was always the smart one, always reading, always dreaming of bringing the family to America for better opportunities. He taught me English by making me practice every night after work." Roberto smiled through his tears. He used to say that education was the only inheritance he could give his children that no one could steal. Emma nodded solemnly. "He told me the same thing. He said words were more valuable than gold because they could open any door." "That sounds like him." Roberto glanced around the luxurious penthouse, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Wellington, I want to thank you for taking care of Emma. I can see she is healthy and happy." "Emma has been the greatest gift of my life," Marcus said carefully. "She's changed everything about who I am and what I believe matters." "I believe that," Roberto said, surprising him. "But she is my blood, my family's responsibility. In our culture, family takes care of family. It is a matter of honor." Emma looked between the two men, her young mind clearly working through implications that shouldn't burden any child. "Uncle Roberto, where would I live if I came with you?" "I have a small apartment in Houston. Nothing fancy like this, but clean and safe. There's a good school nearby with other Mexican-American kids. You could learn about your heritage, speak Spanish every day, know where you come from." "And Mr. Marcus?" Emma's voice was barely audible. Roberto's expression softened. "Mr. Marcus would always be welcome to visit. I'm not trying to erase what he's done for you, mija. But you're a Rodriguez. That means something." Emma stood abruptly, clutching her notebook. "I need to think. Is that okay? Can I go to my room and think?" Both men nodded, watching her climb the stairs with the weight of an impossible decision on her small shoulders. "She's very mature for 8, Roberto observed. "Too mature," Marcus replied. "She's had to make adult decisions her entire life. I was hoping to change that." They sat in uncomfortable silence, two men who wanted the same thing, Emma's happiness, but couldn't agree on how to achieve it. "Mr. Wellington," Roberto said finally, "I don't hate you. I'm grateful you saved her when I couldn't. But I need you to understand. I've been sending money to support my family since I was 15. When my brother died, I became responsible for his daughter. It's not just about what I want. It's about what's right." Marcus nodded, understanding honor in a way he'd never considered before. "And I need you to understand that Emma isn't just some charity case to me. She's become my daughter in every way that matters. The thought of losing her feels like dying." Roberto studied Marcus's face, seeing pain that money couldn't heal. "You really love her. More than I knew I was capable of loving anyone." From upstairs, they heard Emma's voice calling softly, "Uncle Roberto, Mr. Marcus, can you both come here? I want to show you something." They found Emma sitting at her small desk, surrounded by open notebooks filled with stories and drawings. She looked up at them with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years. "I wrote something for both of you," she said. "Will you listen?" Emma cleared her throat and began reading from a page covered in her careful handwriting, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lost her first family in a terrible accident. She was very sad and scared and had to learn how to be brave when everything felt broken. For a long time, she lived in the cold and dark, thinking maybe she was meant to be alone forever." Marcus and Roberto sat on either side of her bed, both men hanging on every word. Then one day, she met a man who had forgotten how to love because he was scared of being hurt again. He had everything money could buy, but nothing his heart really needed. When they found each other, something magical happened. They remembered that families aren't just about blood or birth certificates. They're about people who choose to love each other even when it's scary. Emma turned the page, her voice growing stronger. But then the little girl's uncle found her, and he loved her too, because she reminded him of his brother who had gone to heaven. The uncle had honor and tradition and wanted to do right by his family. He offered her a different kind of love, the love of knowing where she came from and who her people were. She looked up at both men, tears in her eyes but determination in her voice. The little girl realized she didn't have to choose between two different kinds of love. She could have both if everyone was brave enough to create a new kind of family, one built on choice and care, instead of just blood or just convenience. Roberto and Marcus exchanged glances, beginning to understand where Emma's wisdom was leading them. "Uncle Roberto," Emma said, turning to face him directly, "I want to know about Papa and our family in Mexico. I want to learn the songs Abuela sang and the stories about our ancestors. I want to speak Spanish without feeling ashamed and understand why Papa came to America and what he dreamed for me." Roberto's face lit up with hope and pride. "But," Emma continued, holding up her hand, "Mr. Marcus is my Papa now too. He chose me when I was invisible to everyone else. He changed his whole life to make room for me. He brought Miss Santos back and helped my school and became a different person because loving me made him better." She stood up, looking between them with 8-year-old seriousness. "I don't want to choose. I want Uncle Roberto to be my family, and I want Mr. Marcus to be my Papa. Can't we all be a family together?" The room fell silent except for the sound of two grown men trying not to cry. Roberto spoke first, his voice thick with emotion. "Mija, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe Uncle Roberto could move to San Francisco. Maybe Mr. Marcus could help you find a good job here, and you could live nearby, so I could see you all the time. Maybe we could have Sunday dinners together and you could teach me about our traditions, while Mr. Marcus helps me with school and writing." Marcus felt his heart expanding in ways he hadn't known were possible. "Emma, you're talking about creating something that doesn't really exist in law or society. Then maybe we create something new," Emma said, with the confidence of a child who hadn't yet learned that some things were impossible. "Maybe we show people that love is bigger than rules." Roberto stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city that could become his new home. "It would mean leaving everything I know in Texas, starting over. It would mean gaining a family," Emma said quietly. "And Mr. Marcus could help with that, couldn't you?" Marcus looked at this remarkable child who was orchestrating a solution that honored everyone's hearts. "Roberto, I run a tech company that's always looking for skilled construction managers for our new facilities. The pay would be significantly better than what you're making in Texas." Roberto turned around slowly. "You would do that? For someone who came here to take away the most important thing in your life?" "No," Marcus said, understanding flooding through him like sunrise. "I do that for someone who loves Emma as much as I do. Someone who could give her something I never could, a connection to her heritage and her father's memory." Emma clapped her hands together. "So we can try? We can all be a family together?" Roberto looked at Marcus, and something passed between them, an understanding that transcended competition and entered the realm of shared purpose. "There would have to be legal arrangements," Roberto said slowly. "Shared custody, clear boundaries, respect for both relationships." "I have excellent lawyers," Marcus replied. "They can structure whatever we need to make this work legally and emotionally." Emma launched herself at both men, wrapping her arms around them in a three-way hug that felt like coming home. "This is how families should be," she said, her voice muffled against their shoulders. "Not fighting over who owns who, but choosing to love each other, even when it's complicated." As they held each other in that sunlit room, filled with Emma's stories and dreams, Marcus realized that his greatest business negotiation had just been conducted by an 8-year-old girl who understood partnership better than any Harvard MBA. She hadn't chosen sides. She'd expanded the definition of family itself. But even as joy filled his heart, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered a question that would soon demand an answer. Was this beautiful solution too good to last, or were there still secrets waiting to emerge from the shadows of the past? 2 months later, the unconventional family arrangement was thriving beyond anyone's expectations. Roberto had moved into a beautiful apartment, 6 blocks from Marcus's penthouse, close enough for daily involvement, but far enough to maintain healthy boundaries. Marcus's company had hired him as a construction coordinator for their new campus expansion, where his bilingual skills and work ethic quickly earned respect from colleagues and supervisors alike. Emma flourished under the dual attention, her Spanish improving rapidly under Roberto's patient tutoring, while her English writing skills soared under Marcus's encouragement. She kept detailed journals about her dual heritage, creating stories that bridged 2 cultures with the natural ease of a child who saw connection where adults often saw division. But on this particular Tuesday evening, as they gathered for their weekly family dinner at Marcus's penthouse, the careful equilibrium they'd built was about to face its greatest test. Roberto arrived carrying a manila envelope, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by visible anxiety. Emma was setting the table with characteristic precision, chattering about her day at school, when she noticed her uncle's serious expression. "Tio Roberto, what's wrong? You look like when Papa used to get bills he couldn't pay." "Oh." Roberto and Marcus exchanged glances heavy with unspoken communication. Over the past 2 months, they'd developed a partnership based on Emma's best interests, but Roberto's news threatened to shatter everything they'd built. "Emma, mija, we need to talk about something important," Roberto said, settling into his chair with the envelope clutched in his hands. Marcus felt ice forming in his stomach. "What is it?" Roberto opened the envelope and pulled out official-looking documents bearing the seal of the Mexican consulate. "I received these yesterday. They're from our family lawyer in Guadalajara." Emma's eyes widened. "About Abuela?" "No, sweetheart. About you." Roberto's voice was gentle, but firm. "Your grandmother has been fighting the Mexican courts for 2 years, trying to gain legal guardianship. She never gave up believing she could bring you home to live with your father's family." The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was about to consume everything they'd built. Marcus felt his world tilting. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that Abuela has won her case. The Mexican courts have ruled that Emma should be with her blood family in Mexico, where she can grow up surrounded by relatives who knew and loved her parents." Roberto's hands shook as he held the papers. "They're ordering me to bring her back within 30 days. Emma's face went white. "But I don't want to leave. I just found my family here." "It's not about what any of us want, mija," Roberto said, tears beginning to form in his eyes. "It's about Mexican law and family honor and doing what our ancestors would expect." Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the windows that overlooked the city where he'd built his empire and found his heart. "There has to be something we can do. Appeals, international custody law, diplomatic channels. I've already consulted with 3 different lawyers," Roberto interrupted, "because Emma was born in the United States. It's complicated, but because both her parents were Mexican citizens and she has extensive family in Mexico actively seeking custody. The International Family Court tends to favor keeping children with their cultural heritage." Emma clutched her notebook to her chest, the same gesture Marcus had first seen that night in the rain. "Tio Roberto, do you want me to go to Mexico?" The question hit Roberto like a physical blow. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with suppressed sobs. "Part of me wants to honor our family's wishes and take you home where you belong, but another part of me sees how happy you are here, how much you've grown, how much Mr. Marcus loves you." "And which part is winning?" Emma asked with devastating directness. Roberto looked up, his face streaked with tears. "The part that thinks an 8-year-old shouldn't have to keep making impossible choices about where she belongs." Marcus returned to the table, his mind racing through possibilities and resources. "What if we fight it? What if we take it to the U.S. courts and argue that Emma's best interests are served by staying here?" "We could try," Roberto said, "but international family law is complex, and the Mexican side has a strong case. Emma would be with blood relatives who've been trying to claim her since the accident. They can provide cultural continuity and extended family support." Emma stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Stop talking about me like I'm not here. Stop acting like I'm a package you need to ship to the right address." Both men fell silent, chastened by the fury in her voice. "I'm 8 years old, not 2, Emma continued, her voice rising with frustration and pain. "I have thoughts and feelings and opinions about my own life. Doesn't anyone care what I actually want?" "Of course we do," Marcus said quickly. "But sometimes the law is made by adults who think they know what's best for kids without asking the kids." Emma's eyes blazed with intelligence and anger. "Well, I'm tired of being decided for. I'm tired of people who love me fighting over who gets to keep me." She stormed toward the stairs, then turned back with tears streaming down her face. "You know what I want? I want my parents back. I want to not be the reason good people hurt each other. I want to stop being the prize in some contest I never asked to enter." With that, she ran upstairs, leaving both men staring after her in shocked silence. Roberto was the first to speak. "She's right. We're doing exactly what we swore we wouldn't do, treating her like property instead of a person." Marcus nodded slowly, his heart breaking for the impossible position they'd put Emma in. "What do we do?" "I don't know," Roberto admitted. "But I think we need to start by asking Emma what she really wants, not what we think she should want." As they sat in the wreckage of their careful family arrangement, both men realized that their greatest challenge wasn't legal or cultural. It was learning to love Emma enough to put her voice above their own fears of losing her. Upstairs, Emma sat at her desk, writing furiously, tears smearing the ink as she poured her heart onto paper. Marcus and Roberto found her an hour later, surrounded by crumpled pages and wearing the exhausted expression of someone who'd wrestled with angels and lost. "Emma," Marcus said softly, knocking on her open door. "Can we come in?" She nodded without looking up from her writing. "I'm trying to figure out how to fix this, but every solution I think of hurts someone I love." Roberto sat on her bed while Marcus took the chair beside her desk. "What are you writing, mija?" "A letter to Abuela," Emma said, finally looking up with red-rimmed eyes. "I want to explain why I can't come to Mexico right now, but I don't know how to say it without sounding like I don't love my papa's family." Marcus felt his throat constrict. "Emma, you don't have to fix this. It's not your responsibility." "Yes, it is," Emma said with heartbreaking maturity. "I'm the person everyone's fighting about. I'm the one who has to live with whatever decision gets made. That makes it my responsibility to at least try to help everyone understand." As she picked up a sheet of paper covered in careful handwriting, "Can I read you what I wrote to Abuela?" Both men nodded, sensing they were about to hear something profound. Emma cleared her throat and began, "Dear Abuela, I know you love me and want me to come live with you in Mexico because that's where Papa grew up and where our family history lives. I know you've been fighting for 2 years to bring me home, and that shows how much you care about me." She paused, wiping her eyes before continuing. "But I need you to understand that I already found a home here with people who chose to love me when I had nothing. Tio Roberto came to take care of me because it was his duty, but he stayed because he learned to love me as I am now, not just as his brother's daughter. And Mr. Marcus became my papa, not because he had to, but because we healed each other's broken hearts." Roberto reached over and squeezed Emma's shoulder encouragingly. "I want to know about our family and our traditions," Emma continued reading. "I want to speak Spanish perfectly and learn the songs Papa sang to me. But I also want to stay in school with Miss Santos and keep writing stories and live with the people who proved that love doesn't have to be about blood or obligation." She looked up at both men. "Then I wrote about a compromise." "What kind of compromise?" Marcus asked, though he dreaded the answer. "I asked Abuela if I could spend summers in Mexico with the family, learning about where I come from, but live here during the school year with you and Tio Roberto." Emma's voice grew stronger as she explained her reasoning. "That way, I get both families, both cultures, both languages. I become a bridge between 2 worlds instead of having to choose just one." Roberto and Marcus exchanged glances, both recognizing the wisdom in her solution, but understanding the complexities it would create. "Emma," Roberto said gently, "international arrangements like that are very complicated legally, and it would mean being separated from both families for months at a time." "I've been separated from everyone I love for 2 years," Emma replied with devastating logic. "At least this way, the separations would be temporary, and I'd always know I was coming back to people who wanted me." Marcus pulled out his phone. "I'm calling David Martinez, my lawyer who specializes in international family law. If there's a way to make this work legally, he'll find it." "You'd really support this arrangement?" Roberto asked, surprise evident in his voice. "Even though it means losing Emma for months every year?" Marcus looked at Emma, seeing not the homeless child he'd found in the rain, but the wise, compassionate young woman she was becoming. "I'd support whatever makes Emma happiest, even if it breaks my heart. That's what real love means, wanting someone's joy more than your own comfort." Emma threw her arms around Marcus's neck. "This is why you're my papa, not because of papers or laws, but because you love me enough to let me be myself." She turned to Roberto. "And Tio, will you help me explain this to Abuela? Will you help her understand that I'm not rejecting our family, just expanding it?" Roberto nodded, tears in his eyes. "I'll call her tonight. I'll explain that you want to honor both families, not choose between them." Dumb. As they sat together in Emma's room, surrounded by her notebooks and dreams, Marcus realized that the three of them had just accomplished something remarkable. They'd put a child's needs above their own fears and created space for a solution that honored everyone's love. But even as hope bloomed in his chest, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that their battle was far from over. International family law was notoriously unpredictable, and Emma's grandmother had resources and determination that shouldn't be underestimated. Still, as he looked at Emma's face, bright with possibility instead of darkened by despair, Marcus felt something he'd never experienced in any business negotiation: the profound satisfaction of fighting for something more important than victory. He was fighting for love itself, in all its complicated, beautiful, impossible forms. The phone in his hand buzzed with a text from his lawyer. "Available for emergency consultation tonight. International custody cases are my specialty. Don't lose hope." For the first time in weeks, Marcus allowed himself to believe that sometimes, just sometimes, the right thing and the legal thing could be the same thing, especially when guided by the wisdom of a remarkable 8-year-old girl who understood family better than any court could ever define it. 6 months later, Emma Rodriguez Wellington stood in the departure lounge of San Francisco International Airport, her dual surname passport clutched in one hand and her ever-present notebook in the other. At 9 years old, she'd celebrated her birthday with both families in a joyous fusion of Mexican traditions and American festivities. She was about to embark on her first summer in Guadalajara with Abuela Carmen and the extended Rodriguez family. The legal battle had been epic and exhausting, involving 3 countries, family courts, international children's rights advocates, and enough legal paperwork to fill several file cabinets. But Emma's heartfelt letter to her grandmother, translated and delivered by Roberto, had accomplished what lawyers alone never could. It had opened Abuela Carmen's heart to the possibility that love could expand rather than divide. Marcus knelt in front of Emma, adjusting her small backpack with hands that trembled slightly. "You have your journal for writing about your adventures. Do you already started 3 stories about flying on airplanes?" Emma grinned, her excitement barely contained. "And Tio Roberto taught me some Mexican games to play with my cousins." Roberto stood nearby with their boarding passes, his own emotions carefully controlled. He would accompany Emma for the first week, helping her settle in and serving as a bridge between her American life and her Mexican heritage. "Remember, mija," Roberto said, "if you get homesick or scared or anything doesn't feel right, we're just a phone call away. Mr. Marcus and I will be on the next plane if you need us." Emma nodded solemnly, then broke into the radiant smile that had first captured Marcus's heart. "I remember. but I won't be scared because I finally understand something important." "What's that, sweetheart?" Marcus asked, his voice husky with impending separation. "Family isn't a place you have to choose," Emma said with the wisdom that continued to astound every adult in her orbit. "Family is love that follows you wherever you go. I'm taking both my families with me in my heart, and that means I'm never really leaving anyone behind." She pulled out her notebook and showed them a drawing she'd made, a heart divided not by lines that separated, but by bridges that connected. On one side, she'd drawn Marcus in his business suit, Roberto in his work clothes, and Miss Santos in her classroom. On the other side, she'd carefully sketched Abuela Carmen, cousins she'd only seen in photographs, and the Mexican home where her father had grown up. "See?" Emma pointed to the bridges between the two sides. "That's me. I'm the connection that makes one big family instead of two separate ones." Marcus felt tears he'd stopped trying to hide sliding down his cheeks. "You're the smartest person I know, Emma Rodriguez Wellington." "I learned it from you," Emma replied, standing on her tiptoes to hug him fiercely. "You taught me that love makes people braver and better. That's what I'm going to teach my cousins in Mexico, that having family in America doesn't make me less Mexican, it just makes me luckier." The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal, calling for families with small children. Roberto shouldered his bag and extended his hand to Emma. "Ready for our adventure, mija?" Emma took his hand, then reached back to squeeze Marcus's fingers one more time. "I love you, Papa Marcus. I'll write you a story every single day." "I love you too, my brilliant daughter, more than all the money in all the banks in all the world." Middle. As Emma and Roberto walked toward the gate, Marcus watched his heart walking away in the form of a remarkable little girl who taught him that the greatest wealth wasn't what you accumulated, but what you shared. She turned back twice to wave, her smile bright enough to light up the terminal. Marcus stood there long after their plane had taxied away, his phone already buzzing with text messages from colleagues about urgent business matters. But for the first time in his adult life, the messages could wait. He had something more important to do. He needed to go home and prepare for Emma's return in August, when she would come back filled with new stories, new Spanish words, and an even richer understanding of where she came from and where she belonged. As he walked through the airport, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him here. 9 months ago, he'd been a lonely millionaire who measured success in profit margins and stock prices. Tonight, he was a father whose greatest achievement was a 9-year-old girl's happiness, whose most valuable possession was a collection of handwritten stories about hope and love and families that transcended every boundary society tried to impose. His phone rang. The caller ID showed Emma's number. She must have already landed and made it through customs. "Papa Marcus!" Emma's voice bubbled with excitement and exhaustion. "I'm here. Abuela is crying happy tears, and all my cousins want to hear about American schools, and Tio Roberto says the house smells just like when Papa was little." "That's wonderful. Sweetheart, are you happy?" "I'm perfect," Emma said, and Marcus could hear the truth in her voice. "Because I know where I come from now, and I know where I'm going back to, and both places are filled with people who love me exactly as I am." After they hung up, Marcus stood in the airport parking garage beside his Tesla, looking up at the stars that connected San Francisco to Guadalajara, to every place love had ever built a bridge between hearts. He thought about the homeless little girl who'd been invisible to the world until she made herself seen through courage and wisdom. He thought about the cold businessman who'd been slowly dying inside his expensive fortress until love saved him from his own success. And he smiled, really smiled, for the first time in 13 years, understanding that the greatest fortune he'd ever earn was the trust of a child who'd looked past his money to see his soul, and then loved both enough to transform them into something beautiful. The stars shone down on a man who'd learned that the most profitable investment was love, that the highest return came from giving rather than taking, and that sometimes the most important business deal was negotiated not in boardrooms, but in the heart of a little girl who understood that family wasn't about ownership. It was about belonging. Marcus drove home to a penthouse that was no longer empty, because it was filled with the promise of return, the memory of laughter, and the certainty that love, once given freely, creates wealth that can never be lost or stolen or diminished. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Writing my first Mexican story tonight. It's about a rich man who became truly wealthy when he learned the difference between having everything and having enough. Love you, Papa. See you in August." Marcus Wellington. Father and family man drove through the San Francisco night toward home, toward stories, toward a future brighter than any profit projection had ever promised. A future written by a wise little girl who'd taught him that the best investments pay dividends in love. And the greatest return on that investment was the privilege of watching her fly.